Night of Easter Sunday. I stood in my kitchen, hands dusted with flour from the vanilla cream egg tarts cooling on the counter. The scent of roasted lamb filled the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of lilies I'd arranged on the oak dining table. My wooden house glowed with candlelight, every corner polished, every plate set with care. 3 days I'd spent preparing lamb glazed with rosemary asparagus salad, garlic butter rolls, and those tarts I'd perfected over decades. Under the Easter tree, gifts waited, wrapped in floral paper, a silver bracelet for my granddaughter Hannah, a weekend getaway voucher for my daughter Judith. But halfway through the meal, Hannah, 20 years old, glanced up from her phone and said with a mocking laugh, "Old folks like you should step aside for the new generation, always droning on about ancient stories." The table erupted in laughter. Mark, Judith's boyfriend, nodded with a smirk. Judith scrolled her phone silent. I smiled the way I always did to hide the hurt, but this time the weight of that smile crushed me. I grabbed my coat, slipped out the front door, and under the moonlight, I tore Hannah's tuition check to pieces. In that moment, I knew I'd never let myself be invisible again. The lamb was still warm when I started slicing my knife, gliding through the tender meat, each cut as precise as my mother taught me. The oak table, a heavy heirloom from my grandmother, gleamed under the flicker of candles. I'd ironed the white linen cloth myself, folded each napkin into a rose, just like I did every Easter. The house felt alive, humming with the promise of family, of stories, shared over plates, heaped with food. I'd always been the one to make these nights happen, to weave warmth into moments that lingered in memory. But tonight the warmth felt fragile, like a flame caught in a draft. They arrived late as usual. Judith swept in, her phone glowing, her voice sharp as she called out, "We're here, Mom." She didn't look up. Hannah trailed behind, earbuds dangling, tossing her jacket onto my armchair like it was a hook. Mark, Judith's new boyfriend, sauntered in last, his laugh too loud as he eyed the lilies. "Very old school, Eleanor," he said, his tone half teasing, half condescending. I smiled, brushed it off, and ushered them to the table. I wanted this night to feel like the Easters of old, when Hannah would beg for my stories, when Judith would squeeze my hand and say, "You outdid yourself, Mom." But something was off. Judith sat beside Mark, her thumb scrolling endlessly, barely nodding when I asked about her job at the insurance office. Hannah slouched in her chair, answered my questions about college with one-word grunts. Fine, good, whatever. I tried to spark a conversation, sharing a memory of George and me at an Easter fair, how he'd won me a stuffed bunny that Hannah used to sleep with as a child. I thought it might stir something, a flicker of the girl who once clung to my knees. But Hannah cut me off, her voice sharp, her laugh colder than the April night outside. "Old folks like you should step aside for the new generation, always droning on about ancient stories." The words landed like a slap. Laughter burst from the table. Mark's the loudest, his head thrown back as he added, "Yeah, you gotta get with the times. Maybe start a vlog." Judith's cousins chuckled, some nervously, some thoughtlessly. Judith's lips twitched, but her eyes stayed glued to her screen, as if she hadn't heard. I froze the knife, trembling in my hand, the lamb half sliced. My chest tightened, breath caught somewhere deep. It wasn't the first time I'd swallowed a careless jab, but this one sliced deeper, not just mocking my stories, but dismissing my very existence as if I were a relic cluttering their bright modern world. I didn't correct her. I didn't ask what she meant. I smiled the kind of smile women like me learn to wear polished and practiced, hiding the cracks beneath. But inside, I was unraveling. Nobody at that table knew, not one of them paused to consider that every gift under the Easter tree came from me. The wireless earbuds, Hannah wanted the cashmere scarf for Judith, the fancy wine Mark was sipping, all paid for by my savings. They didn't know I'd sold George's pocket watch, the one he wore on our wedding day, to fund Hannah's college tuition. They didn't know I'd spent nights balancing her mother's bills when Judith was a single mom, or that I'd driven across state lines to get Hannah's favorite art supplies. They didn't know I'd cried with pride when she got into her dream school. They didn't know because I never asked for gratitude. But as Hannah's words hung in the air, her eyes gleaming with the confidence of youth, I saw her not as the child I'd raised, but as a woman who'd forgotten the hands that lifted her. The table blurred before me, the laughter echoing like a distant storm. I set the knife down, wiped my hands on my apron, and murmured, "I'll grab more wine." Nobody looked up. Nobody noticed. In the hallway, I pulled on my coat, my fingers brushing the envelope in the pocket, the last tuition check for Hannah's spring semester. I stepped outside, the April chill biting my face, the moonlight casting long shadows on the gravel path. I held the check, my neat handwriting stark against the paper, and tore it. The sound was sharp, final cutting through the quiet night. Pieces fluttered to the ground, caught by the wind, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not anger, not vengeance, but clarity. I'd given them everything, my time, my savings, my heart, and they'd given me laughter that stung like salt in a wound. I didn't go back. I stood in the yard staring at the house, its windows glowing with the life I'd built. I waited, half expecting a call, a text, a voice asking where I'd gone, but my phone stayed silent. Hours later, near midnight, a group message pinged from Judith. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. It was amazing. Love you." Hannah added a dancing bunny emoji. That was all. I stood in my kitchen, still in the green dress I'd ironed that morning, staring at the blinking text. I hadn't been missed, not really. My absence wasn't a void, just a convenience. The dining room lay untouched candles, burned low gifts, unopened under the tree. The bracelet for Hannah sat in its box, the getaway voucher for Judith in its envelope. The tarts remained on the counter, their cream sagging. I left it all as it was and climbed the stairs to bed. Sleep didn't come, not from sadness, but from a deeper shift, as if the ground beneath my life had tilted. I wasn't part of their world anymore, just a shadow in their photos, a name on a check. And if I walked away, truly walked away, they'd adjust their lives, rolling on without a hitch. But I wouldn't let myself fade any longer. Sip some warm tea to soothe your throat. And if this story's pulling you in, let me know where you're following from. Don't forget to hit subscribe to support us. After that Easter night, I felt a hollow ache, as if my heart had been carved out and left to wither. The house was too quiet. The dining room still littered with the ghosts of untouched tarts and unopened gifts. I'd always been the steady hand, the one who made our family whole. But now I saw the truth. I'd become a shadow in their lives, valued only for what I gave. My name is Eleanor, a retired accountant, a widow, and until recently, the heartbeat of every family gathering. I'd poured myself into my daughter Judith and granddaughter Hannah, giving more than I ever counted, but over time they drifted. Hannah called me outdated. Judith barely answered my texts, and I felt myself fading like a photograph left too long in the sun. I confided in my old friend Ruth, hoping to find answers, but even then, I clung to the belief that if I kept giving, they'd see me again. I was wrong. Years ago, my life felt full, not grand, but woven with purpose. When my husband George died from a heart attack, the world tilted. We'd been married 35 years, his steady presence, an anchor in my days. He'd leave notes on the fridge, small things like coffees, ready love, and call me Ellie, a nickname that warmed me like sunlight. After he was gone, I turned to family to fill the void. Judith was struggling a single mother after her husband left when Hannah was 2. I stepped in, not just for a season, but for years. I moved into her small apartment, cooked dinners, paid bills when her paycheck fell short. I picked Hannah up from preschool, braided her hair, taught her to count coins, her tiny fingers clutching mine as we played cashier. I didn't mind. It was love, the kind that doesn't keep score. When Hannah started school, I went back to my own place, but I never stopped being there. Sunday dinners were my ritual pot pie and glazed carrots, the table crowded with laughter. Easter was my masterpiece, the house decked with lilies, baskets brimming with treats I'd spent weeks choosing. I gave more than meals, I gave memories, hand-stitched quilts for Hannah's bed photo albums I spent hours assembling. But the biggest gift was silent. Hannah worked hard, aced her classes, led her debate team, and earned a spot at a top college. Judith couldn't cover the tuition, not with her job, and the scholarships that fell short. So I sold George's pocket watch, the one he'd worn on our wedding day, and cashed out part of my savings, the nest egg we'd planned for retirement travels. I opened a tuition account for Hannah, $40,000, all in my name, no fanfare, no announcement. I did it because that's what love meant to me, quiet, steady, unseen. But somewhere along the way, the warmth faded. It was slow, like a river drying up drop by drop. Hannah started shrugging when I shared stories, her eyes glued to her phone. Judith stopped asking me to host dinners, saying she had it handled. My texts went unanswered, my calls cut short. I'd send Hannah little notes, saw a scarf that had looked perfect on you, and get back a single word, cool. I told myself they were busy, that independence was natural. But deep down, I felt it the slow erasure of my place in their lives. It started small. Last fall, I dropped by Judith's house with a batch of ginger cookies, still warm, the kind Hannah used to beg for. She answered the door, phone in hand, mid-laugh with a friend on speaker. "Hey," she said, barely glancing up. "My grandma's here with cookies, so old school, right?" Her friend laughed, and Hannah joined in, setting the cookies on the counter like they were junk mail. No hug, no thank you, just a distracted wave as she went back to her call. I smiled, told myself it was just her age, but the word old school stung like a label that marked me obsolete. Judith wasn't much better. I'd text about our family picnic, asking if she needed me to bring anything. Hours later, she'd reply, "Got it covered. Don't worry. No warmth, no mom. Just a dismissal that left me staring at my phone, wondering when I'd become a bother." I posted a photo on social media, me at the farmer's market with a basket of apples smiling in the autumn light. Judith and Hannah liked every post that week, from influencers to their neighbor's cat, but mine sat untouched, not a single comment. I wasn't angry, just empty, like I'd vanished from their world. At Thanksgiving, the shift became undeniable. I'd offered to host, but Judith insisted on her place, saying I shouldn't tire myself. I arrived with my chestnut stuffing, the recipe everyone used to fight over wearing the navy cardigan George always loved. Nobody noticed. Judith was busy with Mark, who dominated the table with loud opinions on politics. Hannah set plates while scrolling her phone, barely nodding when I said hello. At dinner, they praised Mark's smoked ham and Judith's store-bought pie, but my stuffing went unmentioned. Hannah joked about how seniors don't get social media, and Mark roared, saying I'd probably still use a flip phone. I forced a laugh, but inside I was shrinking, my voice lost in their noise. After dinner, I washed dishes alone, the clink of plates my only company. When I dropped a glass, it shattered, the sound sharp against the chatter in the next room. Judith called out, "It's fine, Mom, don't stress," her tone clipped, annoyed. I knelt, gathering shards, my knees aching, my eyes burning. Nobody came to help. I felt like a guest in the life I'd helped build, tolerated, not cherished. The next day, I sat with Ruth, my friend from my accounting days, at her cozy kitchen table. I told her about Hannah's jabs, Judith's distance. I feel like I'm disappearing, I said, my voice low. Ruth stirred her tea, her eyes kind but firm. You've given them everything, Eleanor, but you can't make them see you. I nodded, but part of me still believed if I kept showing up, kept giving, they'd remember. I'd spent so long being their anchor, I didn't know how to stop. But as I drove home, the ache grew a quiet certainty that I'd been wrong to hope. I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. I told myself they'd come around, that love could bridge the gap. But the truth was creeping in, cold and unyielding. I wasn't just unseen, I was being erased, and I'd let it happen one silent sacrifice at a time. That Easter night left a scar I couldn't ignore, a wound that pulsed with every silent hour that followed. The laughter from Hannah's cruel jab, the indifference in Judith's eyes, the untouched gifts under the tree, they all burned into me, a reminder that I'd become a ghost in my own family. I stood in my kitchen staring at the cold tarts and felt the weight of years spent giving only to be met with dismissal. I'd hoped my love would keep me visible, but hope wasn't enough. That night, I walked away, tore Hannah's tuition check to shreds under the moonlight, and chose to stop fading. By morning, I closed the college fund I'd built for her, returned the gifts I'd so carefully chosen, and took my first step toward a life where I mattered not just to them, but to myself. The dining room was a frozen tableau when I returned from the yard, candles dripping wax plates, half empty, the air heavy with the scent of rosemary and regret. I'd left the table claiming I needed wine, but no one had followed, no one had called out my name. The Easter tree stood in the corner, its pastel ribbons mocking the joy I'd tried to create. Under it, the gifts lay untouched. The silver bracelet for Hannah, the getaway voucher for Judith, each wrapped with care, each a piece of my heart. I stood there, my green dress creased my hands, still trembling from tearing the check. The moonlight had caught the paper as it fell, each rip a release, a refusal to let my worth be measured by their neglect. I waited for a sign, a text, a knock, anything to show they'd noticed I was gone. My phone stayed dark. Near midnight, a message pinged in the family chat. Judith's words glowed on the screen. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. It was great, love you." Hannah added a bunny emoji, its dance absurdly cheerful. I stared at the words, my breath shallow. They hadn't missed me. My absence was a footnote, a convenience. The tarts sat on the counter, their cream sunk in the lamb congealed in its dish. I climbed the stairs, leaving everything as it was, and lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Sleep didn't come, not from anger, but from a quiet unraveling, as if the threads tying me to them had snapped, leaving me adrift. Morning brought no relief. I brewed coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me, as I sat at the kitchen table, the house too still. The snow from early spring dusted the yard, a clean slate that mocked my turmoil. I thought of the years I'd given the pocket watch I'd sold the nights I'd balanced Judith's budgets, the quilts I'd sewn for Hannah's childhood bed. I'd believed love was enough to keep me in their orbit, but I saw now how I'd let myself shrink, how I'd traded my voice for their comfort. Hannah's words, "Old folks like you should step aside," echoed in my mind, not just a jab, but a verdict, as if my age made me disposable. Judith's silence, Mark's smirk, they'd all agreed, even if they didn't say it. I couldn't go back to that table, to that role of giving without being seen. I drove to the bank as soon as it opened, my hands steady on the wheel. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, pulled up the account I'd built for Hannah's tuition. $40,000 scraped together from George's watch, my savings, every birthday check I'd never cashed. I told her to close it to issue a cashier's check in my name. She paused, her pen hovering. I smiled, said I was sure, and watched her process the request. The weight of that decision settled over me, not heavy but freeing, like shedding a coat I'd worn too long. I didn't owe Hannah my silence, my savings, myself. Next, I went to the stores. The bracelet for Hannah, its silver links gleaming, went back to the jeweler. The refund, a small stack of bills in my hand. The getaway voucher for Judith, meant to ease her stress, was canceled at the agency, the clerk's quick nod a mirror to my resolve. Each return was a step, a reclaiming of the pieces I'd given away. I didn't feel spite, only clarity. Love shouldn't mean erasure, and I'd let it define me for too long. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, a glass of chamomile tea warming my hands. The Easter tree still stood, its ribbons drooping, but I didn't take it down. I wasn't rejecting the holiday, only what it had become a stage for my invisibility. The house felt different, not empty, but expectant, as if it knew I was waking up. I thought of Ruth, her words in her kitchen. You can't make them see you. She was right, but I could see myself, and that was enough for now. The days that followed were quiet, not the silence of absence, but of intention. I didn't call Judith, didn't text Hannah. I let the space between us grow, not out of cruelty, but necessity. I'd spent decades being their foundation, but foundations crack when no one tends them. I wasn't sure what came next, only that I couldn't return to the woman who smiled through pain, who gave until she was hollow. That night, as I tore the check I'd chosen to stop fading, and every choice since was a promise to keep. The days after I closed Hannah's college fund felt like walking through fog, heavy and disorienting. I'd torn the check, returned the gifts, and severed the ties that bound me to a family who saw only what I gave, not who I was. Yet the silence in my house was louder than ever, each creak of the floorboards a reminder of my solitude. I'd spent years being their anchor, but now I was unmoored, a woman adrift in her own life. One morning, while sorting through a dusty box of keepsakes, I found a letter from George, my late husband, his familiar scrawl pulling me back to a time when I felt seen. Its words woke something in me, a spark of the woman I'd been before I let myself fade. I confided in Ruth, my friend seeking clarity, and began to live for myself, cooking meals for one, tending my garden, writing thoughts I'd buried for decades. I wasn't whole yet, but I was no longer waiting for them to give me back my worth. The box sat in the attic, untouched for years, a wooden chest filled with fragments of my past. I'd gone up to clear clutter, needing to busy my hands as my mind churned. Inside, I found old receipts, a faded apron, and then the envelope yellowed at the edges, addressed to Ellie in George's bold hand. My breath caught. He'd called me. Ellie said it sounded like a song. I sat on the attic floor, dust motes swirling in the light, and unfolded the letter. It was dated 10 years ago, just before his heart gave out. My dearest Ellie, he wrote, you're the strength behind us, all the quiet force that holds our family together. But I see you even when they don't. If you ever feel lost, remember you're more than their mother, their grandmother. You're you, and that's enough. I read it again, then again, my fingers tracing his words until they blurred with tears, not tears of sorrow, but of recognition, as if George had reached through time to pull me back from the edge. I carried the letter downstairs, clutching it like a lifeline. In the kitchen, I brewed chamomile tea, the steam curling around my face as I sat by the window. The words sank deep, stirring memories of the woman I'd been, the one who laughed easily, who balanced ledgers with precision, who dreamed of writing a book about small-town life. I'd let that woman slip away, trading her for the role of giver, believing it was enough. But George's letter was a mirror showing me how far I'd drifted. I wasn't just a grandmother whose stories Hannah mocked or a mother Judith ignored. I was Eleanor, and I deserved to exist beyond their needs. I called Ruth that afternoon, needing her steady voice. We met at her house, her kitchen warm with the scent of cinnamon bread. I told her about the letter, about the emptiness that had swallowed me since Easter. I feel like I vanished, I said, my voice low. Ruth leaned forward, her eyes sharp. You haven't vanished, Eleanor. You've just been hiding. Giving so much, you forgot yourself. She urged me to start small, to do one thing just for me. I nodded, unsure, but willing the letter's words echoing in my mind. You're you, and that's enough. Back home, I began tentative at first. I cooked a single serving of mushroom risotto, a dish I loved but hadn't made in years, too busy catering to Hannah's tastes or Judith's schedule. I set the table for one, lit a candle, and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The act felt revolutionary, a quiet rebellion against the years I'd spent serving others. I pulled out a notebook, one I'd bought for budgeting but never used, and started writing. Not lists or plans, but thoughts, fragments of my life the first time I met George. The thrill of my first accounting job, the ache of watching my daughter grow distant. The words were clumsy, but they were mine, a reclaiming of a voice I'd silenced. Outside, my garden called. The plum tree, neglected through winter, stood brittle, its branches bare. I spent an afternoon pruning my hands, stained with sap, the air sharp with spring's promise. I noticed tiny buds, green and stubborn, pushing through the bark. They hadn't died, only waited, and the sight stirred something in me. I wasn't broken, just dormant, like the tree ready to bloom if I gave myself care. I weeded the flower beds, planted marigolds, their orange petals, a burst of defiance against the gray days. Ruth came by a week later, her smile wide as she saw the garden. You're coming back, she said, handing me a mug of coffee. We sat on the porch, the plum tree in view, and I told her about the risotto, the notebook, the buds. I'm trying, I said, but it's hard to know who I am without them. She squeezed my hand. You're learning, and that's what matters. Her words, like George's, were a tether, pulling me toward a version of myself I'd forgotten. The silence from Judith and Hannah continued. No calls, no text, as if my absence was a relief. I checked my phone, hoping for a sign, but the screen stayed blank. It hurt a dull ache, but I didn't chase them. I thought of Hannah, her dismissive laugh, and Judith, her eyes fixed on her phone. They'd built a world where I was background noise, and I'd let them, but no more. I wrote in my notebook that night, I am Eleanor, a woman who loved fiercely, who lost herself, but who is finding her way back. The words felt true, a small victory. I wasn't healed, not yet. The fog still lingered, the ache still pulsed. But George's letter had cracked open a door, and Ruth's voice urged me through. I was no longer waiting for my family to see me. I was seeing myself, and with each meal, each word, each bud, I grew a little stronger, a little more whole. The path was uncertain, but it was mine, and I was ready to walk it. George's letter had lit a spark in me, a quiet fire that grew with each day I chose myself. The fog of those post-Easter weeks began to lift, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I'd stopped waiting for Hannah and Judith to see me, stopped letting their silence define my worth. Instead, I acted redirecting the college fund I'd built for Hannah to a scholarship in George's name, donating the refunded gift money to the local library, and stepping back into the community I'd once loved. I changed the locks on my house, a small but firm boundary, signaling I was no longer open to those who didn't value me. But clarity brought conflict. Judith came to my door, her anger sharp, accusing me of ruining Hannah's future. Our confrontation shook the air, but I stood my ground, no longer the woman who softened truth for their comfort. A letter from Amara. The scholarship's first recipient anchored my resolve, and a talk with Ruth helped me navigate the guilt. I wasn't erasing them, I was reclaiming me. The scholarship was my first step. I sat with the director of a local education foundation, a woman with a warm smile and steady hands. I explained my wish to honor George, to turn the $40,000 I'd saved for Hannah's tuition into a fund for students like Amara, a young woman with big dreams and no safety net. The director nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. "We'll call it the George Harper Scholarship," she said, and I felt a warmth spread through me like sunlight after a long winter. The money wasn't gone. It was reborn, a gift to someone who'd see its worth, not toss it aside with a laugh. Next, I took the refunded gift money, the bracelet and getaway voucher I'd returned, and drove to the town library. The building was modest, its shelves worn, but it had been my haven during my accounting days. Ruth greeted me at the desk, her face lighting up. "You're back," she said, pulling me into a hug. I handed over a check enough to buy new books, repair the reading nook, and stock art supplies for the kids' programs. I signed up to volunteer again Wednesdays, reading stories to children who'd giggle at my voices. The library felt like home, a place where I wasn't just useful but wanted my presence a spark, not a shadow. At home, I called a locksmith. The new keys gleamed in my hand, their weight a quiet promise. I wasn't locking out the world, only guarding the space I'd rebuilt. The house, once a stage for family gatherings, was now my sanctuary, its walls holding the echoes of my new beginning. I tended the plum tree, its buds now blooming into pale flowers, and wrote in my notebook, each page a step closer to the woman George had seen. I wasn't angry. I was awake, and every choice I made was a brick in the foundation of a life I'd neglected. But peace didn't come without a storm. 3 weeks after Easter, Judith showed up unannounced, her knock sharp against the morning quiet. I opened the door, my coffee mug still warm in my hand. Her face was tight, eyes flashing with a mix of anger and desperation. She stepped inside, her voice rising before I could speak. "You closed Hannah's fund," she said, her words clipped. "She's drowning in loan applications, and you didn't even warn us." I set my mug down, my heart steady, despite the heat in her tone. I invited her to sit, but she paced her hands, gesturing wildly. "You're punishing her mom for what a stupid joke. You're tearing her future apart." I took a breath, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not punishing her, Judith," I said. "I gave everything, my savings, my time, my heart, and you both treated me like I was nothing. Hannah laughed at my existence, and you let her. I'm done being invisible." Her eyes widened, then narrowed, her voice sharp. "That's unfair," she said. "Hannah's just a kid. She didn't mean it. You're taking this too far." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "I'm taking myself back," I said. "I love you both, but I won't shrink for you anymore." She froze, her breath catching, then turned and left the door slamming behind her. The silence that followed was heavy, but I didn't chase her. For the first time, I let the truth stand unsoftened, unapologetic. That night, I called Ruth, my hands shaking as I dialed. I told her about Judith, the anger, the accusation. "I feel strong," I said, "but part of me wonders if I've gone too far." Ruth's voice was steady, a lifeline. "You've given them a mirror, Eleanor," she said. "They're not used to seeing you stand tall. Hold your ground and let them come to you." I nodded, though she couldn't see her words, easing the knot in my chest. I wasn't cruel. I was honest, and honesty was a boundary I'd never dared to set. 2 days later, a letter arrived from Amara, the the scholarship recipient. Her handwriting was neat, her words raw with gratitude. "Your gift changed my life," she wrote. "I'm the first in my family to go to college, and I'll carry your husband's name with pride." I sat on the porch, the plum blossoms swaying, and cried, not from pain, but from fullness. Amara saw me, not just the money, but the heart behind it. Her words were a balm, a reminder that my worth wasn't tied to those who'd overlooked me. I looked out at the garden, the marigolds vibrant against the green. The confrontation with Judith had shaken me, but it hadn't broken me. I'd spent years smoothing edges, swallowing hurt to keep peace. Now I stood in the truth, and it was power, not punishment. I wrote in my notebook that night, "I am Eleanor, and I choose who enters my life not out of spite, but out of love for myself." The plum tree bloomed. Amara's letter lay on my table, and Ruth's voice echoed in my mind. I was no longer the woman who faded. I was the woman who chose. The confrontation with Judith left echoes, but it also cleared the air like a storm breaking a long drought. I'd stood my ground, redirecting the college fund to a scholarship, donating to the library, and setting boundaries with new locks. Amara's letter had shown me my worth reached beyond those who overlooked me. I was no longer the woman who faded for others, but peace came with a price. Hannah reached out, her voice soft with regret, seeking to mend what was broken. I met her in my garden, where truths were spoken and boundaries drawn. Judith followed her apology, a fragile bridge. I found solace in my choices, in Amara's future, in the quiet strength I'd built. Hannah learned to stand on her own, Judith to see me anew, and I learned my value wasn't theirs to define. I was Eleanor whole at last. It began with a text weeks after Judith storming out. Hannah's message was simple, hesitant. "I'd like to talk, Grandma, if you're okay with it," she wrote. I sat on my porch, the plum tree's blossoms now fading into fruit, and considered her words. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't the woman who'd rushed to fix things either. George's letter had taught me to hold my worth, and Ruth's voice had urged me to stand firm. I replied, "Meet me in the garden Saturday noon." The garden felt right open, alive, a place where growth was possible, where the marigolds still bloomed despite the cooling air. Hannah arrived on time. Her usual confidence softened. Her hands clasped tightly. She sat on the bench beside me, her eyes tracing the plum tree's branches. "I read your notebook," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom showed me a page you left at her house. It broke my heart." I waited, letting her words settle. "I didn't see how much I hurt you," she said. "I took you for granted, and I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, but her gaze was steady. No tears, just truth. I knotted my throat tight. "I hear you, Hannah," I said, "and I forgive you. But I need you to understand, I've changed. I love you, but I won't lose myself again." She swallowed, nodding slowly. "I get it," she said. "I want to earn your trust back." We sat in silence, the garden humming with bees, the air soft with the scent of earth. I told her about the scholarship, about Amara, about George's name living on. Her eyes softened, a flicker of pride I hadn't seen before. When we parted, she hugged me, not the quick embrace of habit, but a careful one, like holding something precious. It wasn't a return to the past, but a beginning, fragile but real. Judith came later, not in person, but through a letter delivered by mail. Her handwriting was uneven, as if written in haste. I sat at my kitchen table, tea steaming, and read her words. "I was wrong, Mom," she wrote. "I let you carry us without seeing the cost. I'm sorry, and I want to do better." The letter wasn't long, but it was enough a step toward repair. I called her that evening, my voice calm. "I appreciate your words," I said. "Let's take it slow, but I'm here." She exhaled relief, clear in her voice. And we talked, not about the past, but about small things, her work, my garden, a tentative rebuilding. Hannah took a part-time job at a campus cafe, her first step toward paying her own tuition. Judith told me Hannah was different, more thoughtful, carrying the weight of her choices. Judith called more, her voice warmer, asking about my library days, listening when I spoke. One Sunday, Hannah sent a package, a hand-knitted scarf in soft blue, her stitches uneven but earnest. I wrapped it around my neck, the wool a quiet promise of change. I found peace in my garden, the plum tree heavy with fruit, the marigolds fading but still bright. Amara's letter stayed on my table, a reminder that my choices rippled beyond my family. She'd started college, her path lit by the scholarship, and I felt pride, not for the money, but for the courage to choose who deserved my gifts. I wrote in my notebook, I am Eleanor, a woman who learned to love herself as fiercely as she loved others. The words anchored me, a truth I'd earned. I learned my value wasn't theirs to give or take. It was mine, rooted deep, like the plum tree that weathered winter to bear fruit. I thought of women like me, unseen, undervalued their strength, mistaken for silence. I wish they could feel this, the quiet power of standing whole. Hannah would grow, or she wouldn't, but that was her path now. Judith was learning, and I'd meet her halfway. Amara was proof my heart could touch lives without losing itself. I sat on my porch, tea in hand, the garden glowing in the dusk. I was Eleanor, and I was enough. Share your thoughts below. If this story makes you want to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe to catch the next journey. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.